Hello, cinefans. I'm Kendall Kruver, and this is Watching Classic Movies. My guest, Lora is a graphic designer, artist, and illustrator who has worked with Turner Classic Movie social media. She's also a board member of and social media strategist for the Ava Gardner Museum in Smithfield, North Carolina. We talked about the different phases of Gardner's 5-decade career, how she went from an untrained discovery to an accomplished actress, and both her popular films and some lesser-known suggested picks. Welcome, Lora. Thank you for joining me today.
Glad to be here. Thanks for asking me.
So I was intrigued by a conversation you said that you'd had about Ava Gardner's screen persona and how it evolved, and also how her screen identity contrasted with the real person. Now, there's a lot of interesting things in there. So how did that conversation unfold?
Well, I was recently, one of our classic movie fellow fans and friends reached out to me, just asking me some questions about my involvement with the Ava Gardner Museum in North Carolina. And we started having this great phone conversation. We got on the phone with each other and probably talked for, 2.5 hours or more about Ava Gardner and just kind of our entry points into her, watching her films and her filmography, and how the development over time of particularly how the studios marketed her and positioned her, and how that somewhat contrasted from time to time with how the films were actually, the plots of the films, how they differed and all of that. And just kind of how the image of Ava contrasted with the real Ava. And I'm very fortunate in my involvement with the Ava Gardner Museum that I feel like even though I never met her, I've gotten to know her to some degree, the real person, and kind of the things that she struggled with, the things that excited her and got her juices flowing and all that, and just the zest for life that she had, but also the kind of moments of insecurity and other things that make her a very approachable star, in my opinion, somebody who you can really kind of get to know and get to understand, and you can kind of see to some degree the choices that she made and the films that she made and all of that. So it's just a really interesting conversation. And when you and I were chatting about having me on and talking about Ava, that was kind of a nice entry point to talk about her in a slightly different way, to talk about how her film persona evolved over time. I mean, she worked in Hollywood for about 5 decades. So she has a large filmography and dabbled in television as well. So there's a lot there to see, a lot there to mine for kind of inspiration and to kind of explore and see how, she embraced aging and how her characters changed over time and all of that. So there's just a lot of great ways that we can kind of poke around the filmography and kind of tap into how it connects to her own life.
Absolutely. And it's just interesting to me how she started with nothing. She was a beautiful girl who became a really wonderful actress. Like, you look at her film test that she did when it was just on the basis of that photo. She barely knows how to put a flower in a vase. And yet the presence is so magnetic. It was undeniable. You had to have her on the screen. I just think it's interesting how in her first role, when she's baby, Ghosts on the Loose, really sticks with me, how she's sitting there silent and not even knowing how to react.
Well, I think that's something that's really interesting in her career. As you mentioned, she got her whole screen career was on the basis of her looks. And that was always kind of in the back of her mind, I think, that idea that, there's this expectation that I'm going to be beautiful. The studio markets me as beautiful, that they expect me to be beautiful. And that's something I have to carry into my characters. And I think she found ways to kind of flex in that space and explore that space, and kind of the complicated relationship women can sometimes have with beauty and their perception within the roles and the ways that the romantic aspects of her characters are in her film, and how the men relate to her because of her beauty or her fading beauty, or her, the beauty as kind of a plot device. Lots of times in her films. And, she did start out, she was 18 years old when she got her studio contract and whisked away to Hollywood, and came from a very, rural farming part of North Carolina, lived a while in Virginia and all of that. And they couldn't understand her on her studio test. That's why it's this silent test. And I know a thing or two about that, having a rather thick Southern accent, as you can tell. I don't know that I sound exactly like Ava, but I'm from a similar part of the state and have been here. My whole family's been in North Carolina a long time. So I definitely have an authentic North Carolina accent. And to kind of know that she went into this career and got this opportunity by her looks, but was immediately criticized with her accent. And she was swept into MGM, and they wanted to make her the MGM starlet, that kind of look. And she rebelled against that and stood her ground, which I applaud her for. And it's ultimately a film like Ghost on Loose. That was the first time she had her name on a marquee. And she writes about that in her autobiography, Ava, My Story, and says how that was like the first and last time that was exciting to her, which, is really interesting to kind of see the thrill of it. But then at the same time, it's like, okay, back to work. This career was really thrust upon her, but she, in my opinion, she made the most of it. And she got out a lot of it and made some fantastic work that really holds up, I think. But in that film, she was never a trained actress. And anytime that she wanted to get more training, she had an opportunity once with Gregory Peck, was going to have her appear in a show that he was doing in La Jolla, a small part, just so she could get the sense of what it was like to be on the stage. And they had become great friends on the Great Center and all, and the studio wouldn't let her do it. And there were other instances where she wasn't going to be the lead. They didn't want their studio's attractive young starlet having these opportunities to really hone her craft. So she had to make the most of it on the sets and with the properties that she was given to do. And I think that puts another perspective on her film career and her body of work, that she's working this out on her own. She's figuring out how to do this one script at a time, one scene at a time. And it really shows you, as she became more confident and more comfortable in her skin and on the screen, that even though from the beginning you can't take your eyes away from her, you start to peel back the layers and really see who she is as a star and what she's bringing to those roles and how she's internalizing those roles, because the only way that she knows how to portray these characters are from her own points of reference, because she's not this classically trained actress.
Oh yeah, totally. I see a little bit of that in Sharon Tate too, where it's these people with good instinct and a willingness to learn, who are pushed aside all the time because the beauty is the focus so much, and they have all this to offer. Ava must have been so strong to be able to push. She could have faded away. Think about how many beautiful women faded away, but she was this force if she went from that. Like, even when you see her going from the Ghost on the Loose to just really a few years later in The Killers, her presence is so much more refined. Still baby, but it's just so much more sophisticated, and the impact is there. She's already learned so quickly and so much with, as you're saying, very little support to hone that part of her skill.
Well, and it's great that you've jumped to that film in particular, because as kind of everybody who knows Ava's story, that's often considered like that's the breakthrough role. Although she had opportunities before that, and Whistle Stop, which was her film right before it, was the film that ultimately helped her get cast in The Killers, because the producer of Whistle Stop saw her in that and thought, this person has something. What's really interesting about that role, and really some of her best films, is that the studio really never knew what to do with her. And it's unfortunate, because MGM was the studio of the stars, more stars than there are in the heavens. You would think that they would know what to do with this incredibly magnetic, attractive, athletic, natural, just all the attributes that she has on the screen, not to mention stunningly gorgeous, but they just never really knew what to do with her. And it was the loan out that gave her these opportunities to learn and really start to get a handle on this acting thing, as she probably would have said. And The Killers is a great example. I mean, Whistle Stop as well, both were loan outs. And those were films where she started to be herself on screen, not like her true self, but explore parts of herself that she could then infuse in the characters, I think. And again, they often, and I've said it more times than I can count, but they often use the words earthy and naturalistic and all of that with her. But I do think those are appropriate words, because there's just something about her screen presence where she, even just the way she walks into a room and the way that she just kind of, I don't know, you are drawn to her, like you said. Your eye stays focused on her. You see her in the screen, and there's other action happening over on the other side of the screen, but you're just totally enamored with who is this beautiful woman. I'm so intrigued by what's going on under the surface. And I think so much of her roles, especially the 4 film noirs that she was able to do, those are films where she has that, a lot of the stuff percolating under the surface, but The Killers being the prime prime example of that, and the one that's certainly the most lauded for lots of reasons.
So what are the other films that you're speaking of?
So Whistle Stop, Singapore, The Bribe, and The Killers are her four.
Okay.
Lora.
So are they among, are those the loan outs as well, or were any of those MGM?
Well, The Bribe, it's interesting. So The Bribe, and I'm horrible of my years, so I'll try to confirm. Yeah, so Whistle Stop and The Killers were in 46, Singapore was 47, and it was not until 49 that The Bribe came out, and that was MGM's attempt at putting her in a film noir and kind of piggybacking on that. You know, MGM's not necessarily that well known for their film noirs compared to some of the other studios. But it was, you know, I mean, if you think back that she went into Hollywood at 41, she spent the first basically 5 years of her career in these small, low budget, sometimes uncredited role, you know, these little bit parts.
Yeah, many.
And then 46 getting Whistle Stop and The Killers and all of that. And that really propelling her. But it took until 49 for MGM to come back and say, let's put her in something, a more prestige vehicle, although the film is sometimes considered kind of a B-level film. But it had Robert Taylor, it had Charles Lawton, Vincent Price, John Hodiak. I mean, it's a bigger sort of prestigious role for her, and she's the lead in it. And she's quite good in it, even if the film has its moments. I mean, it's a very entertaining film. And she's one where you watch it and you're left going, you know, I still don't know what all she's got going on there. There's more to her character, you know, that you're kind of intrigued by the end of the film, I think. So
that was in some ways a turning point for her. Going from there, what was the next time she showed development on another level? Like, where did it progress from the Bribe?
Well, you know, a personal favorite of mine of her filmography is Pandora and the Flying Dutchman. And I know it's not a film for everyone. I understand that. It's worth watching, especially the new re-release of it that's just gorgeous. The new, the one that just came out. So stunning to see her look, the color and everything of it. She takes your breath away. And I know, and I'm not saying that to just kind of minimize her talent. I'm just saying her on the big screen, you're stopped in your tracks. Then you get the benefit and the reward of sticking around and seeing the performance. I like to think of her beauty as sort of an entry point to get people into the film to see the movie. And then you got this wonderful bonus of her being great in a lot of movies. But Pandora and the Flying Dutchman is a film that I'm a champion of that movie. I love it. I think from every part of it, not just her performance, but, you know, Albert Lewin, the screenplay, the direction, the cinematography, the costumes, the plot, the way that it is such an intentional film, that everything from the little bit of artwork on the wall, like it's a movie that every time I watch it, I find something new in it. I see some new, like, oh, they did that, or oh, they did that, oh, how cool. And my background in art school and art history and all of that, I mean, it's a film for artists. I think to some degree, it's a film that if you have an appreciation for art, you're going to get a lot out of that film. And her character is just so interesting. And I really think watching it, you know, I watched it a couple years ago when I started getting involved with the museum. We did an exhibit about Pandora to coincide with the re-release. And I had seen it years before, but rewatched it and watched this new edition of it, and just was so taken by the film and her character, and how we talk about her a little bit evolving, like her screen persona evolving. That's a film where she is to some degree frustrated with her beauty, because her beauty is attracting these people that she has no interest in, that they are just, these hangers-on don't excite her, that don't get her, you know, that don't stimulate her emotions or stimulate her mentally and all of that. And she just wants to, like, guys, and she's honest with them. That's the other thing. Throughout the whole movie, she's like, you don't need to love me because I can't love you. I don't want you. I don't. Go free yourself of me. I'm not what you think I am, what you want, what you need, and I'm not going to be that. And it's so frustrating watching, you know, anybody who's had friends or been in relationships where it's like not totally equitable, and you're like, you just kind of can identify with that to some degree. And then this man who is interesting and intriguing and unlike anybody else comes into the frame, and just they rock each other's world to some degree to casual way of framing it, but I just think it's such a great film, and it really holds up, and it speaks to a lot of things that are very modern, I think, in terms of like women's perspectives and how women kind of have to navigate the world to some degree, and make a way for themselves and kind of pursue their own destiny a little bit.
Yeah. I do feel like it's almost an extension of that killer's character, who also is so much the way she looks is her power. I think in Pandora, she almost rebels against that a little bit. The way she like, there's that scene where she says, "Do you love me enough to throw your treasured race car off the edge of a cliff?" That's her taking control of her beauty in a way. Like she's not being passive. She's getting something tangible out of that beauty. It's destructive, but that's all she's got.
Yeah.
There's nothing else she can do. And I do find that really intriguing. It's also just such a strange film.
Absolutely. It leaves you like you sort of, the first time you watch it, you go, what did I just watch?
Yeah.
A little bit. But then you want to see it. I mean, for me, it's like, I want to see it again. Like, I want to see what when I was working on this exhibit project with the collections manager at the museum, we were texting each other like, "Ooh, I rewatched it. Did you see this? Did you notice this?" And that's how it is. And like I said, down to the costumes, the way that she's framed. I mean, she, arguably she's never more beautiful than she is in that film. And you can tell that Albert Lewin was just so transfixed by her. And there's these great anecdotes that Jack Cardiff has shared where he's like, Albert kept saying, "Can we do another close-up? Can we do another close-up?" And by the time it was over, it was like all close-ups of her, but you can understand why. And it gives the film, there's just such contrast, and there's these beautiful, the whole scene you were talking about with pushing the car over and how she's reclined on the cliff, and there's that close-up of her face and her kind of reaction to making this demand of this man, but also being totally disinterested in whatever he decides to do. There's this kind of conflict within her a little bit where it's like, is he going to do this? Maybe I'll get, maybe that will excite me. Maybe that will make me love him because he's so in love with me. Yeah. But it's, so many of those relationships that, aside from the James Mason one, is about ownership. These men want to possess her and take hold, and she doesn't want to get lost in that. And then when she meets James Mason and they fall in love, they get lost in each other, even though it's that kind of, well, you got to die for me. Well, ultimately that, not to give the movie away, but they die for each other. It ends up not being just one-sided.
One person giving. No, it's the first mutual relationship in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, it's so fascinating because it is just, as the kids say, aesthetic. But it goes deeper than that when you think about all the different power dynamics and the way the relationships are portrayed and what relationship ends up being the one that grabs your soul. Yes, it's a fascinating movie. And I think it's almost my favorite at this point. I can't exactly.
Probably mine too. So.
Yeah. It's the one I will watch anytime. Yeah.
Well, another thing that's interesting about that film, just in terms of like her career. So that film came out in 1951, the same year that Showboat came out. And in Europe, Pandora and the Flying Dutchman was released first, but was released second here. They held it in the States for Showboat to be released first. So the first time European audience saw Ava in full Technicolor glory was Pandora and the Flying Dutchman. The first time we saw her was in Showboat in the States. So there's kind of, that's just we think of Ava, I mean, she's beautiful black and white color no matter what, but you kind of, when I think of her in full color, to some degree. And to kind of just put that in perspective in her career. I mean, it took a decade really to get her in Technicolor, which is kind of wild to think about too.
That just seems like a crime, doesn't it?
It does.
But yes, she was beautiful in black and white. I think some of her best roles were in black and white. Recently, I've been watching more of her later roles and just kind of marveling at how she was shown to age in many roles and still maintained that beauty. It was just of a more ripened variety, as I'm fond of saying. And that almost added to the appeal for me. I don't know. I'm thinking of things like, I'm going real far ahead now, but like Night of the Iguana. I don't think she's ever been more appealing to me. Like Pandora, it's a jaw-dropping kind of beauty. And Night of the Iguana, it sits more in my soul. Because it's John Huston, he loved her. He shows his love for her. that's part of what that is. But yeah, tell me, what are your feelings about that one?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, when I've had conversations with her family members that are involved with the museum, and in fact, our director of the museum as well, Night of the Iguana is probably her favorite Ava film, but the family talks about how kind of the laid back side of the Maxine Falk character, or the way that Ava portrays that character, which is probably somewhat different than Betty Davis portrayed it on stage. But the way that Ava portrays the character, it's very much laid back. You know, she's comfortable in her skin, and you can tell in the movie that it's almost like she, you know, at one time she was the town's great beauty, and now she's a slightly older woman who's a widow, and now she's got this hotel, and she's just, you know, she's living her life. She's hanging with the Cabana Boys. She's just kind of comfortable in her skin, and you know, there's a casualness to her character that I find really appealing. And the family sort of talks about, like, Ava was very laid back in real life. She was very relaxed and not so focused on walking out the door looking like the star. She always looked great, but she looked great in blue jeans. She didn't have to do this. And I love that role because it captures her at that certain, you know, that moment in her life where she is older, but she's also, I mean, she's still so, like you said, appealing and attractive and all of that, but she really embodies that character with that sense of just kind of being comfortable, being like, this is who I am, warts and all. This is, you know, I'm going to be a little dramatic here at times and run out of the room if I want to, but she's very much just kind of in that character. And I feel like when we talked about her a little earlier and talking about her using her own self as a reference, what she knew to kind of to imbue into her characters, I think you see that in this role in particular. And it is a wonderful film. And you're like you said, John, I mean, she and John Huston were great pals and were all the way to the, you know, for the rest of their lives. And you can tell that he filmed her and put her in that role, or has her in that role. The affection he has for her, you can see, I think, in the way that it's directed and filmed, and the way that her character comes to life on the screen. And I mean, it's a great cast. It's got a wonderful support cast. Everybody in it's fantastic, but her character really stands at the top of that, I think. Absolutely. You know, she's the one that you think of after you've watched it, I think. It
does feel like a real person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's always been able to put a little bit of that rawness in there, but that's when she, according to her family, like, did she feel like this was her in this role, or do you have any insight on that?
I don't know if Ava ever said, this is close to me, which if that's the case, then, you know, all of her characters were creations. They were regardless, but they were aspects of herself, but that she built on that and then read into the characters what she, you know, put into it what she could from her personal experience, but then made it specific to the role.
Like, you have to give her credit for her skill as an actress.
Exactly. And I think you see that, especially by the time we get into the 1960s. And when her contract ends with MGM and she starts selecting her own roles, I mean, her first film out of the gate after leaving her contract was On the Beach. And she started working with certain directors that she wanted to work with and being just more selective in the role she played. But, you know, I think her period in the 1960s is a really interesting period of time to look at her. Arguably her kind of peak, or what most people think of as her peak, were the 1950s. But I really like those 60s, and I like the 70s films too. I think there's interesting things to kind of pick out from those. And as she's getting into kind of more genre pictures like Earthquake or The Sentinel and that kind of thing, that are a little more exploitive, but still interesting and worth watching to kind of see where she's taking things, or what she's exploring in the characters that she's bringing to life on screen. But Night of the Iguana is a really, I think when the family talks about that, it's more just like the laid back aspect of it, that she's, you know, she was, I mean, there's these great stories of her, like taking, she would water ski to the set every day. I mean, she was very athletic and very, she had a great zest for life in general. She loved to absorb the foods and the cultures and the music and the dance wherever she was. That's why she famously left Hollywood and moved to Spain, and then lived in London and spent the bulk of her life over, you know, in Europe, but really embraced those cultures and the food and the dance and all of the things that were exciting to her. And she just kind of lived that life. And sometimes that's reflected in her roles. I think you can kind of see that. A worldliness to her characters, if you will. But I just think that's really interesting. And to know those things about her on the set, you know, that she was hanging out with John Huston and Richard Burton and just having a ball. You can see kind of the rapport. There is a built-in rapport in that movie between the characters that exists before the movie starts. So when they all interact, I think you see that comfort level is already kind of there with them. And I think that goes to the, you know, the time and things that they spent together before the production started, and that they're all kind of cast out in this, what at the time was the middle of nowhere, making this movie. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's a really fascinating film, and it's a departure to some degree from her. I wish she had had more opportunities. When she was with the studio, they made such a effort to mold her into what they thought she should be. Even in the context of loan outs from time to time, when they would be distributed by the studios, and the studio would approve the marketing for certain films and that kind of thing, they would change the context and change the meaning. Like The Angel Wore Red started out as a very different film before it was completed. You know, the studio intervened and was like, she needs sexier costumes. Oh, okay. She needs to be more attractive. She doesn't need to be as stripped down and that kind of thing. Bhawani Junction's another film where it's like, the way that Cukor had directed that film is not it, and the way he cut it, after a few test audiences, the studio came in and re-edited it and changed things and added a voiceover and did a lot of stuff to kind of impact the final performance, because changing the context of things and then marketing it like she's a sex pot kind of thing on the poster.
Animal, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas Night of the Iguana, that didn't happen. She was able to be this kind of stripped down, wearing her capri pants and her off the shoulder sweater and just living it up, running this hotel. And I love that. Yeah. I love that we get to see that side of her, because we were close to getting to see elements of that in previous films that we didn't get to because of the intervening powers of the studio.
Oh no, absolutely. And I mean, what you said about the camaraderie, you can feel that friendship with Burton providing a good base for what they show on the screen. That bond does show for sure. And I do think that her ability to be a pal really affected, in some respects, the work she got, but mostly the work she did. And I mean, you know, I know I was talking to you about wanting to talk about Tam Lin. Mm-hmm. And the reason I wanted to talk about that film is because I think it shows when she was respected, how different, because I don't think it's her best role or part that she got necessarily. It's entertaining and it's beautiful, and I love her performance. I think it's her last kind of great performance as far as a star performance. Mm-hmm. But what I love about it is that this is an age where she's in what you call like those exploitation films, which I love. You know, I love anything with Shelley Winters or Ava Gardner in that age. I keep talking about Shelley Winters lately. I'm there, and they're going to be wonderful. But if John Huston loved Ava Gardner, Roddy McDowall, the director of this film, treasured her. Mm-hmm. You know, he adored her. He wanted to make this film for her. And you see that in the way that he films her. And it's so different from the way she's filmed in something like A City on Fire, mm-hmm. or Earthquake, where they're kind of trying to show her in decline.
They're kind of making her haggard looking, yes. and trying to make her an annoyance in the movie, yes. to some degree, you know, like she's, you know, if only she weren't there, then Charlton Heston can go off and have this wonderful love affair with this young woman, you know, that kind of thing, where it's like, I don't care for that. I mean, you know, go back to Remy, go back to Ava Gardner, and, you know, she's been there for you through everything, and now you're going to kind of treat her this way. But yeah, I agree. I mean, they're fascinating movies to watch. And just as an aside, Earthquake was her biggest box office hit, which is interesting to think of. But I think Tam Lin is a really interesting, I mean, again, it's another one like Pandora. It's not for everyone, and you have to kind of contextualize the movie and understand the time in which it was made. And for those who aren't familiar with the film, it was Roddy McDowall's directorial debut, his only mm-hmm. film that he directed, which is such
swan song. Yeah,
such a shame. I wish he had the opportunity to direct more. But it was shot in like around '69. But the studio that was helping, that they got the funding through, it was a low budget movie, went bankrupt. So the movie was shelved for about 2 years, and I think it was released in in the States at least, released in '72. Oh. So the movie itself is very much, you know how kind of like when we think of a decade, really the most extreme elements of a decade are at the end of it or at the beginning of the next. So like the most 1980s fashion was really like in 88, 89, and 90. So in the most what we think of as the 60s hippies fashion was really 68, 69, and 70, that kind of thing. So this movie, the costumes, the reference points, the music, all of that are like the height of the 60s. So when this movie came out, was shelved and came out years later, so much of the reference points of the film were already seemed old to some degree. So that hurt it when it was released, and it kind of was a somewhat forgotten film, but has been rediscovered. And it's a really interesting film to watch. And it is a real departure in her kind of body of work. I mean, just kind of the plot and the way, I mean, it's another kind of fantastical movie that has these trippy drug sequences and great folk music and beautiful scenery. And but her character really is, like you said, Roddy loved Ava and Ava loved Roddy in return. And I think Ava would say that one of her kind of biggest legacies in life was being a wonderful friend. She loved her friends wholeheartedly, would do anything for them. And I think Roddy said something to the effect of, she loved us too much almost. She was too loyal to us, But she really loved him and wanted to do this for him. And her being in it helped him get funding to back it. And in turn, he wanted to make sure that she had a great experience on it because he saw her worth, he saw her value, and he saw what she could do. And she thrived when she had a good director, when she had someone who, we talk about those early moments of this, her having this accent and the studio wanting to change her and all of that. That fed into some of her insecurities that are well documented, that she often, co-stars and people that worked with her will often say that she didn't think she had a lot of talent, that she kind of would say, oh, I'm not really that good, or I'm not, whatever. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of disparaging remarks to kind of not have people expect too much of her, I guess, to some degree, to kind of prevent the criticism before it happened, which is a thing that a lot of people do to kind of, protect yourself a little bit. But I think she did that. And but when she had a good director and when she felt support in a production and felt like she had a clear rapport with the director and the cast and an understanding of where she could take the character, she really did thrive. And in this movie, as trippy and wild as it is,
it is a mess in a way.
And you're just totally, again, kind of like, who is this lady? Who is this Mickey person? I want to know her. I want to be in her commune and in this beautiful house in Scotland or wherever.
It's clearly shallow and toxic, and take me in. I don't care. No, I just, it doesn't date well in a lot of ways, but it's weirdness. And the fact that she's just treated so beautifully makes it endlessly intriguing to me anyway. And you're drawing the comparison to Pandora is so good, because it really shows that if you put her in a weird place, she does thrive. And that's something she could have probably done really well if given the opportunity. She could have made probably a little more of the 60s,
Yeah, probably so.
A lot of that stuff was very exploitive for women of her age and position as a star. But I still think like she could have done something, gone to Europe and done some film and done something pretty great, which is not to say she didn't do amazing, especially when you consider how so much of it comes down to her own strength, her ability to form bonds, her talent, and how she developed it, and how, like you say, how she had so little support. I mean, there's so much more to say about it, but maybe we'll have to have another conversation here, Laura.
Yes, absolutely.
But this has been wonderful. You've introduced me to some titles that I admit I hadn't seen, and I thought I'd seen it all. So I'll be, toddling right along to see all of those. But I really appreciate your insight and just your generosity towards her, because she deserves it. I don't think she always gets it. So that's wonderful that you do that. And you're such a great advocate for her.
Well, that's very sweet of you to say. And I hope, that she has such a diverse body of work. She worked in almost every genre you can imagine. And there's an entry point for everybody, even if you're not into all the types of films that she did. There's something there to see and something intriguing. And I hope that people will take the time, if they haven't already, to start looking at her work and looking, we talked about a lot of kind of somewhat lesser known titles today. And I hope that that will intrigue people to go check some of those out, because I think I think anytime you get a chance to see Ava Gardner on the big screen, it's worth seeing. So
yes, just to see her. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you.
For more information, including how to follow Lora on social media and details about the Ava Gardner Museum, go to watchingclassicmovies.com. If you're enjoying the show, I invite you to follow, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Thank you for your support. This is Kendall Cruver, watching classic movies. Until next time.